Welcome to the adventure of the Stationer's Secret, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series The Lost Cases of Young Sherlock, before Baker Street, playing in the year 1874. Though I have long chronicled the adventures of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I had believed his career to have commenced with our own fateful meeting. It was, therefore, with some astonishment that a collection of papers was recently unearthed from the archives of his university friend, Victor Trevor. This trove of letters and journals reveals his formative years, presenting the very cases that first honed his legendary skills. I have taken the liberty of compiling them as the lost cases of young Sherlock, before Baker Street. From this collection, I shall begin with a curious affair which I have come to call the adventure of the Stationer's Secret. Chapter 1. The autumn term had settled upon the university like a fine mist, and with it came the familiar quiet of academic pursuit. In our shared lodgings, the only sound was the gentle crackle of the fire. Our friend, Victor Trevor, sat opposite me, lost in a volume of jurisprudence, the silence between us comfortable and profound. Our quiet was punctuated only by the low, intermittent bubbling from the corner where Sherlock Holmes was hunched over his chemical apparatus. A sharp, acetic scent hung in the air, a testament to his latest foray into forensic science, and he seemed a world away, lost in his work. This scholarly peace was shattered by a sudden, frantic rapping upon our door. The sound was not a polite inquiry, but a desperate, hurried summons that made Trevor look up from his book with a start. I rose to answer it, and upon drawing back the bolt, was met by a gust of damp, chilled air, and the sight of a man whose face was a mask of pure distress. It was Mr. Alistair Abernathy, the proprietor of the stationer's shop near the college, a man I knew by sight as the epitome of meticulous order. Now his grey hair was dishevelled, his spectacles askew, and his hands twisted the brim of his hat with a terrible anxiety. He peered past me into the room, his eyes wide. "Mr. Holmes, I was told I might find you here. I must beg your assistance. A catastrophe has occurred, a veritable disaster," Mr. Alistair Abernathy said. I ushered him inside, closing the door on the encroaching evening gloom. Holmes, who had hitherto seemed utterly absorbed, turned slowly on his stool. He did not rise, but his eyes, sharp and piercing, fixed upon our visitor with an unnerving intensity. "You are Mr. Abernathy of the stationers. Pray, compose yourself and state your facts. Emotion is the enemy of observation," stated Sherlock Holmes. The man took a shuddering breath, his voice trembling as he began his tale. "My shop, it was broken into, discovered only this morning. The lock on my back door had been expertly forced, the work of a skilled hand," Mr. Alistair Abernathy answered. He shook his head, a look of profound confusion on his face. "But that is the mystery of it, sir. He was no common thief. My finest fountain pens, the silver-chased ones from France, were untouched. A case of Moroccan leather portfolios, worth a considerable sum, lay in plain sight, all ignored. He took nothing of obvious value." "Then what was stolen, Mr. Abernathy?" Victor Trevor said. Abernathy wrung his hands, his gaze darting between us. "Paper, Mr. Trevor. 5 reams of my finest imported vellum, a specific stock I procure for university diplomas," said Mr. Alistair Abernathy. Holmes, who had been listening with an air of detached curiosity, suddenly stilled. His gaze sharpened, but he said nothing, letting the stationer continue. And my client ledgers. 2 volumes containing the accounts and private addresses of every student and professor I serve," remarked Mr. Alistair Abernathy. He slumped into the chair I offered, his face pale. He clearly feared the worst, that the ledgers which detailed the students' debts were to be used for blackmail. "My reputation will be ruined. The trust of these families, all gone," remarked Mr. Alistair Abernathy. Holmes sprang to his feet, his earlier lethargy instantly forgotten. Twice he strode before the fireplace, each step eliciting a groan from the aged floorboards. The flickering flames cast his sharp profile in dramatic relief against the darkened room. No, no, Mr. Abernathy, you've quite mistaken the motive. A blackmailer, pah, such a small-minded creature preying on immediate fears. No, this is the work of a true intellect. We face an architect of a far grander design, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He turned from the fire, his eyes locking onto Abernathy's, his voice cutting through the quiet room with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Your thief ignored the silver pens for the same reason a botanist ignores diamonds in a field of rare orchids. The value is not in the object, but in its potential. He did not steal your ledgers to expose debt. He stole them for the mailing addresses of the wealthy families who send their sons to this university, declared Sherlock Holmes. Abernathy and I could only stare, bewildered. Holmes pressed his fingertips together, his expression one of pure, intellectual delight. It is a list, Mr. Abernathy, a perfect list of potential customers. And what might one sell to such a list, using paper identical to that of the university's official documents? Not threats, my dear sir. Forgeries, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The word landed in the room with a quiet, chilling finality. Certificates, transcripts, diplomas, the very currency of this academic world. This is not blackmail. It is fraud on a magnificent scale, Sherlock Holmes noted. The implications settled in the room, vast and unsettling. The theft was not an end, but a beginning. Holmes's eyes shone with a feverish light I had come to recognize. He turned to our shaken visitor. I will take your case, Mr. Abernathy. The problem is a singular one, and I anticipate it will present features of considerable interest. Trevor, be ready. Tomorrow at 9, we shall pay a visit to the stationer's shop and see what other secrets the scene of this peculiar pilferage may hold. Sherlock Holmes said. The following morning found Holmes and me navigating the narrow, cobbled streets that coiled like serpents around the university. A persistent drizzle had descended upon Cambridge, turning the grey stone of the colleges to a damp, glistening black. Mr. Abernathy's establishment was a modest beacon of warmth and order in the gloom, its bow-fronted windows neatly displaying fountain pens and scholarly texts. The sharp jingle of a small brass bell announced our arrival as we pushed open the heavy oak door, bringing with it a gust of damp air that mingled with the shop's pleasant scent of paper, leather, and drying ink. Mr. Alistair Abernathy emerged from behind a towering stack of ledgers, his face etched with the same anxiety as the day before. He was a small, precise man, and the disruption to his meticulously organized world was plainly a source of profound distress. He wrung his hands, his knuckles white. Mr. Holmes, thank heavens you have come. I have touched nothing, just as you instructed. The constabulary were here, of course, but they saw little more than a common burglary, remarked Mr. Alistair Abernathy. The constabulary see what they are trained to see. Let us hope we may find what they have overlooked. Pray, lead the way, Sherlock Holmes said. Abernathy led us past counters laden with goods of considerable value, silver inkstands, penknives with mother-of-pearl handles, and a cash box that sat, apparently untouched, upon a shelf. The scene of the crime was a small office at the rear. Here, the violation was more apparent. A gap on a high shelf and a roll-top desk with one drawer prized crudely open. You see, they took nothing of obvious value. But from that drawer, they stole 3 of my largest sales ledgers, the ones detailing university accounts for the last 2 years. And from that shelf, 5 whole reams of my imported verse bond paper, the paper with the special watermark. They left the cash, the pens, everything. It makes no sense at all, Mr. Alistair Abernathy answered. While Abernathy lamented, Holmes had already dropped to his hands and knees. To the casual observer, he might have seemed a man searching for a dropped coin. But I was beginning to understand my friend's peculiar methods. With his magnifying lens in hand, He was not looking at the grand chaos of the scene, but at the infinitesimal world upon the floorboards. His examination was silent and intense, his breathing the only sound in the small room save for the frantic ticking of a mantel clock and the distant rumble of a passing dray cart. "Have you found something, Holmes?" Victor Trevor said. "I have found an absence of something, Trevor, which is in itself a clue. And I have found a presence. Our thief was a careless fellow in some respects and a most careful one in others." Sherlock Holmes responded. He rose suddenly, his grey eyes alight with that familiar predatory gleam. In one hand he held a small square of pink blotting paper he had plucked from the floor. He gestured with his other hand towards a faint, almost invisible smudge of reddish clay near the leg of the desk. "Mr. Abernathy, your intruder was no common housebreaker. He is a man of learning, I should think, and he is a student of chemistry." The stationer stared, his mouth slightly agape. I confess I was no less baffled by Holmes's confident pronouncement. "Chemistry? Good heavens, Holmes! How on earth did you arrive at that conclusion?" remarked Victor Trevor. "Elementary. This is not the common mud of a Cambridge street. It is a specific marl clay, found in only one place nearby, the soil beds outside the university's new chemical laboratories." Sherlock Holmes said. I stared from the faint smudge on the floor to Holmes's triumphant face, the connection still eluding me. But he was not finished. "Furthermore, this is no random ink stain. Look at the impressions on this blotting paper. Faint but discernible. They are not letters," said Victor Trevor. "Precisely. They are the ghost of a chemical equation. I see the symbol for chlorine and what appears to be part of a formula for a bleaching agent," observed Sherlock Holmes. As we watched, Holmes wove the disparate threads of evidence into a tapestry of deduction, each connection falling into place with the satisfying click of a solved puzzle. "Our man required your unique paper and the ledgers for a reason, Trevor. He possesses the scientific knowledge to analyze and likely replicate its composition." "To create forgeries," Victor Trevor said. "Indeed, he is not merely a forger, he is an artisan of fraud. A student, I suspect, with access to the laboratories and a desperate need that drove him to this risk," explained Sherlock Holmes. The case had transformed. It was no longer a simple matter of theft, but a glimpse into the dark ambitions churning beneath the surface of academic life. Holmes turned to me, his expression animated, the hunt now truly begun. "Trevor, our next step is clear. We cannot find this man by searching for mud-stained boots. We must delve into the university itself," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. "But how, Holmes? We can hardly go door to door," Victor Trevor answered. "No need. I have a small, informal society of keen observers within the student body. It is time to ask my dilettante detectives what whispers they have heard in the hallowed halls," Sherlock Holmes said. The familiar comfort of our Baker Street sitting room gave way to a cramped chamber, its air heavy with the scent of old paper and beeswax. Holmes's curious discovery at the stationer's had led us here. It was the meeting room of the Dilettante Detectives Club, a society of university students Holmes had taken an interest in. Rain pattered a steady, somber rhythm against the tall Gothic windows, and a grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds with a heavy, portentous beat. The air hummed with a low murmur of anticipation as Holmes, seeming to fill the room with his own energy, paced before the small assembly of bright-eyed young men and one remarkably composed young woman. "I have not gathered you here to discuss hypotheticals. I have a genuine problem, a case which the official police would dismiss as trivial, yet which I believe possesses features of the most singular interest," observed Sherlock Holmes. He paused, his sharp gaze sweeping over the faces before him. He detailed the break-in at Mr. Abernathy's shop, his words painting a picture of a most unusual thief. "Consider the facts. The thief ignores a cash box containing several pounds. He ignores a display of fine silver fountain pens," replied Sherlock Holmes. He began to tick the points off on his long, thin fingers, his voice cutting through the steady drumming of the rain outside. Instead, he risks imprisonment for 2 specific sales ledgers and a quantity of imported vellum paper. The crime was perpetrated by someone who needed not wealth, but a very particular resource, a resource connected directly to this university. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. But for paper and ledgers, Holmes, it seems a paltry prize for such a risk. What could possibly be the aim? Wondered Dr. John Watson. The young woman, a Miss Elena Whitfield, whom I knew to be the club's most astute member, leaned forward slightly, her expression one of intense concentration. You believe the thief is a student, Mr. Holmes, one who required the paper for a specific purpose and the ledgers to conceal a transaction. Miss Elena Whitfield replied. Precisely, Miss Whitfield. Your minds, and more crucially your ears, are invaluable to me. Become my eyes and ears within these hallowed halls, stated Sherlock Holmes. He lowered his voice, and the students leaned in, the creak of their chairs the only sound besides the ticking clock. Listen keenly in the dining commons, the libraries, the courtyards. I am interested in any student who has shown a sudden, almost miraculous, improvement in their academic standing. Any whispers of examination results that seem too good to be true, declared Sherlock Holmes. A buzz of excitement went through the little group. A boisterous young man named Perkins was the first to his feet. By Jove, a real case. I shall start in the science labs. There's always gossip buzzing around the Bunsen burners, Perkins answered. Soon they had all dispersed, their footsteps echoing down the stone corridors until they melted into the general hum of university life. Holmes and I waited, the silence of the room now broken only by the clock and the unceasing rain. It was well past dusk when the heavy oak door creaked open, admitting them one by one. They brought with them the damp chill of the evening and a flurry of hushed, excited whispers, their faces flushed with the thrill of the chase. Perkins spoke first, confirming Holmes's general theory. There are indeed rumors of several students performing unexpectedly well on recent papers. Young Finch in philosophy, for one, failed his logic prelim twice, yet I hear his latest essay on Mill was deemed masterful, responded Perkins. Holmes nodded, absorbing these details. But it was Miss Whitfield who, as usual, cut through the general rumor to provide the first solid thread. There is a great deal of talk surrounding a Mr. Cecil Radford. He was on the verge of being sent down for poor marks in mathematics last term. This term, however, he received the highest commendation on his geometry proofs, so high, in fact, that my friend in the registry said the Dons were muttering about it. And what's more, he has apparently settled significant gambling debts, answered Miss Elena Whitfield. I saw a flicker of cold fire in my friend's eyes. The only sound in the room was the soft hiss of the gas lamp and the final, heavy tick of the clock as he stood perfectly still, his long fingers steepled before him. In that charged silence, I could almost hear the disparate facts, the stolen paper, the doctored ledgers, the sudden academic genius, knitting themselves together into a single, coherent tapestry of fraud. Excellent, the vellum provides the canvas for the forgery. The stolen ledgers erase the proof of its purchase. And the result, the impossible commendation of Mr. Radford, stated Sherlock Holmes. The scope of the deception was suddenly immense, far more than a simple student prank. It was a calculated attack on the very integrity of the institution. Such a scheme, however, requires a final, critical piece. The fraudulent documents must be entered into the official record. They must pass the eye of the man responsible for certifying all results, explained Sherlock Holmes. The university proctor, responded Dr. John Watson. Precisely. Dr. Bartholomew Hayes. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall pay him a call. We must ascertain if he is a victim of this deceit, a fool, or a willing accomplice. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The whispers gathered by the dilettante detectives had given us a direction. a faint scent on the wind. It was this scent that led us, the very next morning, through the hallowed quadrangles of the university. The air was thick with the earnest murmur of scholarly debate and the solemn tolling of a distant college bell. Before us loomed the austere stone edifice of the proctor's office, a place students spoke of in hushed and fearful tones. Inside, the office was a monument to rigid order. Books stood in severe, unbroken lines upon the shelves, and not a single paper was out of place upon the vast mahogany desk. Behind it sat Dr. Bartholomew Hayes, a man whose face seemed carved from the same unyielding stone as the building itself. His eyes were small and gray, and they watched our approach with undisguised impatience. To his side, a younger man with a nervous countenance, whom Hayes introduced curtly as Victor Trevor, his junior proctor, fidgeted with a pen. "Dr. Hayes, we appreciate your time. We're investigating a theft at Abernathy's. Ledgers and specialized paper were stolen. Paper identical to that used for university certificates," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Hayes steepled his fingers, his expression one of profound boredom. His voice, when it came, was as dry as old parchment. "And you believe this petty crime falls under my purview? I am responsible for the discipline and academic integrity of this university, Mr. Holmes, not the policing of local tradesmen," replied Dr. Bartholomew Hayes. At this, a flicker of something, was it alarm, passed through the proctor's eyes. The junior, Trevor, shifted in his seat, his gaze darting between Holmes and his superior. Hayes's tone, however, grew colder still. "Fanciful conjecture, Mr. Holmes. I will not have the student body disturbed during the examination period. The matter is closed," Dr. Bartholomew Hayes replied. "But, sir, if there is a chance of forgery," replied Victor Trevor. Hayes cut him off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. The single, harsh gesture silenced the younger man instantly. "That is enough, Trevor. Mr. Holmes, I cannot assist you. Good day," replied Dr. Bartholomew Hayes. The heavy oak door closed behind us with a definitive thud, echoing through the stone corridor. Outside, a cool breeze did little to disperse my irritation as I turned to Holmes. "An obstructive and singularly unpleasant fellow. What do you make of it, Holmes?" asked Dr. John Watson. Holmes did not reply at once. He had stopped and was staring back at the proctor's window, his brow furrowed in thought. A faint smile played upon his lips. "Obstructive, yes. But more than that, Watson, he is afraid. It was not mere dismissal, but active obstruction. A man only builds such a high wall when he has something of great value or something terribly damning to protect," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I considered his words. The image of Hayes's rigid posture and the flash of fear in his eyes came back to me. "You believe he is involved," Dr. John Watson added. "Not involved, Watson, but compromised. He is a pawn, not a principal. Those ledgers contained leverage. Dr. Hayes is being blackmailed, his authority used as a shield for the true culprit," declared Sherlock Holmes. The scope of the affair suddenly seemed to widen, its tendrils reaching into the very heart of the university's authority. Holmes began walking again, his pace brisk and decisive, his eyes alight with the fire of the chase. "We cannot force the proctor's hand, so we must find the hand that forces his. The rumors from our young detectives mentioned a student whose academic ascent has been miraculous. A student named Cecil Radford, whose marks in jurisprudence leapt from near failure to the top of his class. Our next call, Watson, is upon this suddenly brilliant young scholar," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The damp Cambridge air did little to lift our spirits after the interview with the unyielding Dr. Hayes. Holmes fell into a profound silence, his footsteps echoing softly beside mine on the stone flags. He led me not towards our lodgings, but to the university library, a great stone edifice. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper, the only sounds the hushed rustle of turning pages and the occasional, distant thump of a book being returned to its shelf. The ledger's stolen from Abernathy's shop, Watson, Holmes mused, his voice low and thoughtful, recorded sales. But what of the university's own records, the records of academic achievement? He secured a list of students whose marks had shown a most remarkable and sudden improvement over the last term. His long, thin finger traced its way down the columns of names before stopping abruptly. The name was Cecil Radford. Here is our man, a middling student by all accounts, who has suddenly blossomed into a first-rate scholar. Let us pay Mr. Radford a visit, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. We soon arrived at Radford's lodgings, a narrow, grim-looking terrace house near the university. Inside, the sparse room reeked of pipe tobacco and ink. Books teetered everywhere, suggesting frantic disorder rather than studious calm. A young man with tired eyes and a frayed collar rose to greet us, his breathing shallow. It was immediately apparent he was under some great strain. "Mr. Radford, I believe. My name is Sherlock Holmes, and this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. We are making some inquiries on behalf of the university." "The university? I don't understand. Is there some trouble? Are my fees in arrears?" said Mr. Cecil Radford. His voice was thin, almost a whisper, and he kept glancing towards the door as if expecting the sharp rap of an unwelcome visitor. Holmes's manner was deceptively gentle. "Merely a routine matter concerning suppliers. We note you are a frequent customer of Mr. Abernathy's stationer's shop. A man of discerning taste in paper, perhaps," stated Sherlock Holmes. At the mention of the stationer, a flicker of panic crossed Radford's face. He licked his lips, and I could hear the faint, nervous drumming of his fingers against a book spine. I buy what I can afford, just the essentials. Now, if you'll excuse me, I cannot afford to waste a moment. I have a great deal of study to attend to," answered Mr. Cecil Radford. His reply was too quick, his dismissal too abrupt. The door clicked shut behind us with a note of finality. We soon found ourselves back on the pavement as a light drizzle began to fall, hissing softly on the cobblestones and making them shine under the gaslights. "Well, Holmes, that was hardly conclusive. The lad is clearly agitated, but that proves nothing," Dr. John Watson replied. "Patience, Watson, we shall wait," stated Sherlock Holmes. He drew me into the shadows of a nearby archway, the damp stone cold at our backs. Not 10 minutes had passed before the clatter of hooves and the rumble of wheels announced a carriage pulling to a sharp halt. A young woman alighted, Miss Elena Whitfield, a face I recognized from the Dilettante Detectives Club. She did not enter the house, but paced anxiously, the soft tap of her boots on the wet pavement a restless rhythm in the quiet street. Presently Radford emerged. Though we were too far to discern their words, the hushed, urgent tones of their argument reached us on the damp air. His posture was defensive, his hands chopping at the air. Hers was one of desperate pleading. The confrontation was brief, ending with Radford turning away abruptly, the slam of his door echoing in the street. Miss Whitfield was left to stare after him, a solitary, troubled figure, before she returned to her carriage. As we settled into a hansom cab, the rhythmic clatter of the horse's hooves filled the silence between us. Holmes finally spoke, his voice low but filled with the thrill of discovery. "Did you observe his cuffs, Watson? Frayed, his boots, risoled and poorly at that. The man is in desperate financial straits. Yet he is engaged to Miss Whitfield, whose family, I happen to know, possesses considerable means and even greater expectations for their daughter's match," stated Sherlock Holmes. "Good heavens, Holmes! You believe he is committing fraud to secure his position and satisfy her family," Dr. John Watson replied. "It is the most potent of motives, love and money. He is not the mastermind, Watson, merely a desperate pawn. He requires forged certificates to secure a future he cannot otherwise afford. And for that, the forger requires a specific, high-quality paper. the very paper stolen from Mr. Abernathy's shop. Our next task is clear, Sherlock Holmes noted. He produced from his pocket a single, pristine sheet of paper he had deftly palmed from a stack in Radford's room, its crisp edge making a faint whisper as he unfolded it. He held it up to the flickering light of a passing gas lamp. We must understand the paper itself, for I suspect its very composition holds the key, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. My friend's deductions concerning the unfortunate Mr. Radford had left me in a state of some bewilderment. Yet Holmes himself seemed to have already moved past the man's motive and onto the means. We found ourselves once more within the quiet confines of Mr. Abernathy's shop, the air thick with the pleasant scent of vellum and binding glue. There you are, Mr. Holmes. I've done the tidying you requested, though I'm still quite baffled by it all. It's just as I said. The scoundrel was most particular, took only the ledgers and that one type of paper, said Mr. Alistair Abernathy. On the contrary, Mr. Abernathy, the most eloquent clues are often those which are left behind. The paper, if you please, not the stolen folios, but a sheet from the remaining stock, observed Sherlock Holmes. The shopkeeper, his brow furrowed in confusion, retrieved a single, crisp sheet of cream-laid paper. Holmes accepted it with a nod and carried it to the front window. He angled the sheet against the grey afternoon light, a faint dampness in the air promising rain. The distant clatter of a drayman's cart on the cobbles seemed to punctuate the silence within the shop. For a long moment he was still, his hawk-like profile etched against the pane, his focus absolute. Ah, just as I suspected. Watson, come and see. Sherlock Holmes responded. I peered over his shoulder. Held against the light, a faint, almost spectral design was visible within the very fibers of the paper. A stylized griffin, clutching a small key in its talons. It was a mark of exquisite and unusual detail. A watermark? Good heavens, Holmes, is it significant? Wondered Dr. John Watson. It is everything. Our thief did not merely require paper, he required this paper. The value lies not in the stationery, but in its unique identity. This mark is a signature, and one which I must have identified. There is only one man in this university with the requisite knowledge of ancient paper and its guilds. We must call upon Professor Finch, declared Sherlock Holmes. A short, handsome cab ride brought us from the commercial bustle of the Stationers' Street to the hallowed, quieter precincts of the university. The air itself seemed to change, growing heavier with the weight of centuries of scholarship, as we approached the rooms of Professor Finch, a leading figure in antiquarian studies. Professor Finch's study was a sanctuary of academic quietude, the walls lined from floor to ceiling with leather-bound tomes. A low fire whispered in the hearth, casting a warm glow upon a great oak desk cluttered with artifacts and manuscripts. The professor himself, a man with a neat grey beard and sharp, intelligent eyes behind his spectacles, rose to greet us. With him was his daughter, Miss Elena Whitfield, the very same young woman we had observed with Cecil Radford. She was arranging a tray of tea things, and her hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she saw us. Holmes, an unexpected pleasure. To what do I owe the honor? Pray, do not say you have unearthed a Carthaginian relic in a college quadrangle, responded Professor Alistair Finch. Something rather more modern, I'm afraid. I should value your opinion on this, Professor, observed Sherlock Holmes. Holmes produced the sheet of paper. The professor took it, his manner one of professional interest, and held it to the light of his desk lamp. As he did so, I saw Miss Whitfield pause, her knuckles white around a porcelain cup. Her gaze was fixed upon her father, with an expression of profound anxiety. Ah, yes, the griffin and key. A rather charming mark, wouldn't you agree? It belongs to a minor Florentine guild from the late 17th century. They were known for their excellent rag paper, though the guild itself was short-lived. Not exceptionally rare, I must say. One encounters variations from time to time in my field of study. Professor Alastair Finch answered. His voice was smooth, perhaps a little too dismissive. It had the quality of a lecture delivered many times before. At his words, I saw the tension leave his daughter's shoulders, a silent wave of relief passing over her. And you are certain of its commonality. This particular stock was imported directly for the university stationer, explained Sherlock Holmes. My dear fellow, these things find their way into all sorts of channels over the centuries. A historical curiosity, to be sure, but hardly a foundation for one of your fascinating inquiries. Now, you must have some tea. It is getting rather chilly out, said Professor Alastair Finch. We departed soon after, the professor's affable dismissal still echoing in our minds. Stepping out into the encroaching twilight, we found ourselves in a world transforming. The first gas lamps hissed to life, their glow pushing back the gathering darkness. Holmes, usually so quick with his observations, was uncharacteristically silent. He paused beneath a lamp post, and I watched as the light carved his features into a stark relief of illumination and shadow. "Did you observe it, Watson?" deduced Sherlock Holmes. "Observe what, Holmes?" The professor seemed quite certain, wondered Dr. John Watson. "Not the father, the daughter. Her reaction is the one piece of data that does not fit his narrative. Did you not see her terror when he first held the paper to the light? And the profound, almost desperate relief when he declared it insignificant? The professor was lying, Watson. He knows precisely what that watermark signifies, and for reasons we have yet to determine, he is desperate to conceal it. The paper is the absolute key to this affair," Sherlock Holmes noted. He turned his intense gaze from me to the darkened street that led back towards the center of town. A new energy seemed to possess him, a hunter who has finally struck upon a fresh scent. "Our forger will need more of his canvas. He has exhausted his supply and will be driven back to the source. Tonight, we shall keep a vigil. We shall watch Mr. Abernathy's shop, and I have a strong suspicion our phantom of the paper mill will make a second appearance," explained Sherlock Holmes. The memory of Miss Whitfield's troubled face lingered with me, but Holmes's mind was already fixed upon the next step. Our vigil began shortly after 10, secreted in a darkened doorway opposite Mr. Abernathy's shop. The street was quiet, save for a distant college clock and the rustle of dry leaves. A biting wind cut through my overcoat, and I finally broke the silence. "You're certain he'll return, Holmes? Surely it's too great a risk for the thief," remarked Victor Trevor. Holmes shifted beside me, the faint scent of his pipe, tobacco a small comfort in the gloom. He kept his gaze fixed upon the shop front as he replied, "It is a calculated one, Trevor. Consider the crime. Our man did not steal for monetary gain. The cash box and valuable pens were untouched. He stole ledgers and a specific paper stock. It suggests an ongoing enterprise. He was interrupted and took only what he could carry. The work is incomplete. He needs the rest of his materials, and he will risk much to acquire them," deduced Sherlock Holmes. His logic was, as always, impeccable. We fell into a prolonged silence, the minutes stretching into hours. Past midnight, the gas lamp's wavering shadows played tricks on our eyes. Suddenly, a flicker of movement at the lane's far end caught our attention. A cloaked figure moved with furtive haste, hugging the deepest shadows of the college walls. The figure paused before the stationers, glancing nervously up and down the deserted street before approaching the door. We heard the faint, metallic scrape of a tool being inserted into the lock. Holmes placed a steadying hand on my arm, his touch light, yet conveying an immense coiled energy. "Now, Trevor." His whisper sliced through the night silence. We burst from our hiding place, our boots ringing out on the stone. The cloaked figure started violently, dropping his tool with a clatter. A pale face turned towards us for a frozen instant. Then the figure spun and fled down a narrow, unlit alley. The chase was a frantic, breathless affair through a warren of passages behind the university buildings. Our quarry was swift, and the echo of our running feet was a drumbeat in the sleeping city. As he rounded a sharp corner, his foot caught a loose cobble. He stumbled with a muffled cry, then scrambled up and vanished into the darkness of a cloister. We slowed to a halt, listening to the fading footsteps. He was gone. I stood panting, my lungs aching, but Holmes had already dropped to one knee where the man had fallen. His attention was fixed on the ground. He has left us, a souvenir of his visit. He stood and held up a small, dark object, a grimy, coarse rag. Bringing it closer to a gas lamp, I saw a dark, wet stain. From it emanated a sharp, acrid odor, not ink or oil, but something far more chemical. Holmes's eyes gleamed with a fierce, intellectual light. This, Trevor, is of infinitely more value than any stolen ledger. Our phantom is not merely a thief, he is an artisan of some kind. This smell, it is the very scent of fraud, and it will lead us directly to his workshop. The rag, that sordid trophy from our midnight chase, lay upon a porcelain dish in Holmes's temporary laboratory. The members of the Dilettante Detectives Club crowded around the table, their youthful faces a study in fascination and impatience. Holmes, however, moved with serene deliberation, adding a single drop of reagent to the stain. The air, already thick with the scent of pipe tobacco, now carried a sharp, clean tang. Holmes's chemistry experiment had begun. "There," he said, his voice cutting through the expectant silence. "The reaction is immediate. This is not merely an ink solvent, but a bleaching agent, a rather specialized formula used to treat high cotton content paper to artificially age it or remove imperfections. There are but 2 chemists in Cambridge who stock such a compound," explained Sherlock Holmes. He straightened up, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. One of the students, a keen young man named Trevor, was already moving, retrieving a thick volume from a nearby shelf. "The Cambridge Commercial Directory, Mr. Holmes. I have it open to the chemists," Trevor answered. Holmes took the book without a word. His long finger traced the short list before stabbing decisively at a name. Within minutes, we had requested the assistance of Constable Grimshaw. His solid, uniformed presence was a comfort as our investigation led us away from the hallowed quadrangles and into the labyrinthine back alleys of the town. Here, the grand stone facades gave way to grimy brick, and the air grew heavy with the smell of damp coal and boiled cabbage. Our footsteps, once lost in the bustle of the main thoroughfares, now echoed with a stark clarity between the narrow, oppressive walls. A dismal, rhythmic patter of dripping water from some unseen pipe provided the only accompaniment. "Not the sort of place for university men, Mr. Holmes," Constable Grimshaw grumbled, his tone heavy with disapproval. Responded Constable Grimshaw. He cast a wary eye down the dim lane. "More likely to find a cutpurse than a scholar here." "On the contrary, Constable," Holmes replied sharply, his gaze fixed upon a grimy door at the end of a blind alley. "It is the perfect place for a scholar who wishes not to be found. Seclusion is a commodity, and here it is cheap," declared Sherlock Holmes. The door was unremarkable save for one detail that Holmes's hawk-like eyes had instantly perceived. The lock, though old, was free of rust, and showed faint scratches of recent, frequent use. Grimshaw applied his shoulder to the wood. With a splintering crack, the door flew inwards. It revealed not a squalid tenement, but a long, dark corridor where a faint chemical odor, the very scent from the rag, hung thick and cloying in the air. At the end of the passage stood another door. It was unlocked. Holmes pushed it open, and we stepped into a large, windowless room. I confess I gasped. Before us was a scene of extraordinary industry. A small printing press stood in the center of the room, its metal gleaming in the lantern light. Beside it were stacks of that same expensive, imported paper we had seen at Abernathy's shop. On a long workbench lay a collection of engravers' tools, pots of ink, and a heavy embossing press bearing the university crest. "Good heavens, Holmes," I breathed. "It is a complete forgery operation." remarked Dr. John Watson. Holmes gave a grim nod, lifting a partially completed examination certificate from the bench. He held it to the light of Grimshaw's lantern, his expression one of cold, intellectual appreciation. More than that, my friends, this is artistry. Observe the watermark, a flawless imitation. The calligraphy is impeccable. This is not the work of one desperate student, but a sophisticated enterprise. We are not dealing with a simple thief, but with a master craftsman whose talents are bent to a most sinister purpose, replied Sherlock Holmes. He moved to a small desk in the corner, upon which sat a ledger. With a soft rustle of paper, he flipped it open. The pages were filled with names, dates, and sums of money. My eyes fell upon one entry, a name I recognized from our discussions with Miss Whitfield, Cecil Radford. Beside it, however, were notations and figures that spoke not of simple transactions, but of mounting debts and crushing obligations. The forger, it seemed, was himself caught in a trap. The fruits of our raid upon the forger's den lay scattered across our sitting-room table. Forged certificates, samples of the unique watermarked paper, and the chemically stained rag that had been our guiding star. Holmes had been silent for the better part of an hour, his long fingers steepled before him, his eyes fixed upon the hearth. I recognized the mood well, the deep contemplation that preceded a decisive strike. The air was a heavy blue haze of shag tobacco, and outside, the rumble of Baker Street traffic had begun to subside. Suddenly, a sharp rap came upon our door, followed by the familiar tread of Mrs. Hudson upon the stair. She entered bearing a silver tray upon which sat a small, sealed envelope. It was delivered, she announced, by a young gentleman, a Mr. Victor Trevor, who had insisted it was of the utmost urgency. Holmes snatched the note, his lethargy vanishing in an instant. The crackle of the paper was sharp in the quiet room as he tore it open, his eyes scanning the contents with fierce concentration. At last, Watson, a break in the clouds. It seems a conscience has become too heavy a burden for one of the players in this drama, stated Sherlock Holmes. The note, penned in a delicate hand, requested a clandestine meeting in 1 hour's time. The author was Miss Elena Whitfield. An hour later found us in a secluded corner of the university grounds known as the Fellows' Garden. The stone walls of the old library cast long, cold shadows as twilight descended. The air was still and cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and ivy, and the crunch of our boots on the gravel path was the only sound. A figure emerged from the deep shade of a yew tree, her movements hesitant and furtive. It was Miss Whitfield, her face pale in the gloaming, her hands clasped tightly before her. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, trembling with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Mr. Holmes, thank you for coming. I could bear the burden no longer. I cannot stand idly by while a good man is destroyed," replied Miss Elena Whitfield. "You are speaking of Mr. Radford. Your loyalty does you credit, Miss Whitfield, but the truth is a non-negotiable commodity. Is he the forger?" remarked Sherlock Holmes. A faint sob escaped her lips, a sound of profound grief. She nodded, her gaze fixed upon the ground. "He is, but he is not the villain of this piece. He is a victim, I swear it. He was desperate, trapped by debts, and someone on the university staff offered him a way out," remarked Miss Elena Whitfield. She paused, taking a ragged breath, her eyes pleading with Holmes to understand the distinction she was so desperate to make. "This man uses Cecil's talent, pays him a pittance, and threatens him with utter ruin if he does not comply. Cecil is a prisoner, Mr. Holmes, not a mastermind. I do not know the man's name, only that he holds a position of authority and inspires a terrible fear in my fiancée," Miss Elena Whitfield answered. Having unburdened herself, she seemed to shrink, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders before melting back into the shadows from which she had come, leaving Holmes and I alone with her desperate revelation. Back in our rooms, the gas lamps hissed softly. Their warm glow did little to dispel the chill of the evening's revelations. Holmes paced before the fireplace like a caged tiger who had at last scented his prey. For several minutes, the rhythmic tap of his leather slippers on the floorboards was the only sound to break the tense silence. It is a three-tiered structure, Watson, a perfect little hierarchy of crime. Miss Whitfield has just handed us the key to its architecture. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He stopped his pacing and turned to face me, his grey eyes alight with the fire of deduction. At the bottom, we have the craftsman, the artist, Mr. Cecil Radford. His skill is the engine of the entire enterprise. Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He held up one finger as if ticking off a point on an invisible list. Above him, there must be a manager, an enforcer. This person identifies the clients, distributes the forged documents, and ensures they are entered into the university's records. He must have access, authority, and a veneer of unimpeachable integrity. Good heavens, Holmes! So this mastermind Miss Whitfield spoke of sits at the very top, pulling the strings, asked Dr. John Watson. Precisely. But we cannot reach the head of the serpent until we have first exposed its body, observed Sherlock Holmes. He moved to the table and picked up the chemically stained rag, turning it over in his fingers as he continued. Consider, Watson, who oversees the examinations with an iron fist, whose rigid adherence to procedure is so well known that no one would dare question a document that appeared to have passed his muster. The very man whose inflexibility creates the perfect cover for such a scheme, replied Sherlock Holmes. He paused, allowing me a moment to follow the unerring line of his reasoning. The faint clang of a distant bell told the hour. In that instant, with the chime still hanging in the air, I saw it as clearly as he did. A cold certainty washed over me. It was, I had to admit, a masterful piece of deduction. Our next port of call, my dear fellow, is the university proctor. Dr. Bartholomew Hayes is the linchpin of this affair, and I have a strong suspicion that a little pressure will cause him to break, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Acting on the information from Miss Whitfield, Holmes moved with a swiftness that left me breathless. Within the hour, we stood before the imposing oak door of Dr. Bartholomew Hayes, the university proctor. His brass nameplate was polished to a fault. Holmes had sent a message ahead, so there was no need to knock. The door swung open, revealing a study as rigid and unyielding as its owner. Dr. Hayes stood beside a towering bookshelf, his posture ramrod straight. He was a man who clearly mistook rigidity for strength. The only sound in the room was the severe, metronomic tick-tock of a grand long-case clock. His voice, when he finally spoke, crackled like dry parchment. He intoned each word with a forced civility, attempting to project an authority he no longer possessed. Mr. Holmes, your summons was most irregular. To what do I owe this? Intrusion, answered Dr. Bartholomew Hayes. I am here, doctor, because of a watermark, because of a student named Cecil Radford, and because you are being blackmailed to conceal a crime, Sherlock Holmes said. The color drained from the proctor's face. His composure, so meticulously constructed, fractured like fine china dropped upon stone. He grasped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. A sharp, hitched breath was the only sound before he spoke, his attempt at indignation dissolving into a stammer. I have no idea what you are talking about. This is slander, answered Dr. Bartholomew Hayes. Do not waste my time. Radford's hand is plain in the forgeries, but he is merely the pen. Someone else provides the ink, the pressure, the instructions. You, doctor, are the gatekeeper, forced to look the other way. You are trapped by your past, and I know you are being blackmailed, observed Sherlock Holmes. A heavy silence fell, punctuated by the clock's merciless ticking. Hayes collapsed into his chair with a muffled thud, his ramrod posture crumbling. Where once stood a proud proctor, now cowered a frightened, cornered creature. His confession came on a shuddering exhale, a whisper so ragged and frail it was nearly lost to the air. It is true, all of it. He has letters from years ago. He threatened my career, my very name. What was I to do? Remarked Dr. Bartholomew Hayes. You will help me. Your only path to leniency is to help me catch the man who holds your leash. We have very little time, replied Sherlock Holmes. Our next destination was the local police station. The sharp scent of carbolic soap and the sight of scrubbed floorboards felt a world away from the dusty libraries of the university. I watched Dr. Hayes, now a cowed and compliant shadow, sit hunched on a bench while Holmes conferred with a stout, square-jawed officer, Constable Grimshaw. A map of the university grounds was spread across a table under the flickering gaslight, a battlefield in miniature. Right then. So the drop is always the same. Radford leaves the papers, and this mastermind of yours collects them, Constable Grimshaw replied. Precisely. Radford makes another delivery tomorrow evening. Dr. Hayes will confirm the usual time and place. Constable, your men will be positioned here, and here, in the shadows of the colonnade. I have also enlisted my friend, Victor Trevor, whose knowledge of the grounds will provide us with another set of eyes. We do not touch Radford. He is our bait. We wait for the true architect to claim his prize. Sherlock Holmes responded. Grimshaw gave a short, sharp nod, his jaw set. He traced the positions on the map with a thick finger. I felt that familiar thrill course through me, the quiet anticipation of the hunter. The pieces were moving into place. The board was set for the final play, and I knew we were on the cusp of checkmate. Tomorrow night, Watson, we shall administer a final examination of our own, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The air in the disused bursar's office was thick with the scent of decaying paper and the chill of undisturbed dust. Through a grimy pane of glass in the connecting door, we observed the adjacent room, lit by a single, low-burning gas lamp. Outside, a biting November wind howled around the ancient spires, its mournful cry punctuated only by the creak of a floorboard or the soft groan of Constable Grimshaw's leather boots as he shifted his considerable weight. Beside me, Holmes was a study in stillness, a sharp silhouette against the faint light, his patience a palpable force in the profound silence. A clock tower somewhere in the quadrangle struck 10, each chime hanging heavy in the cold air. Minutes later, a key grated in the lock of the outer door. The door to the lit office swung inward, and the slight, nervous figure of Cecil Radford entered. He placed a leather portfolio upon the desk, his hands trembling visibly in the flickering gaslight. He was followed by Dr. Hayes, the proctor, whose face was a mask of pale, grim resolve. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards our hiding place before taking up a position by the cold hearth. The final player arrived not 5 minutes later. His footsteps were quick and confident, a stark contrast to Radford's shuffling gait. He was a small, reedy man with spectacles perched upon a sharp nose, a man I recognized as Silas Croft, a senior clerk from the university registrar's office. He entered without a knock, a superior smirk playing on his thin lips. Well, Radford, the documents, do you have them? And the university seal, is it flawless? We can't afford even the slightest error. The university clerk mastermind said, They are perfect, Mr. Croft, utterly flawless. My debt, is it now settled? Please, tell me this is the end of it, answered Cecil Radford. Radford's voice was a mere whisper, fraught with a desperate hope. Croft gave a dismissive sniff and reached for the portfolio, his thin fingers about to touch the leather. It was at that precise moment that Holmes chose to act. He threw open the connecting door with a crash that echoed like a gunshot, and we swept into the room, the sudden beam of Grimshaw's bullseye lantern fixing the conspirators in a harsh, white glare. A final examination, I believe, and one which you have all failed spectacularly. Mr. Croft, your career as an entrepreneur of academic fraud is at an end, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Croft spun around, shock and fury contorting his face. The forged documents fluttered from his grasp, scattering across the floor. Radford let out a choked cry, staggering back against the desk. Dr. Hayes, in stark contrast, simply bowed his head in shame. With practiced efficiency, Constable Grimshaw moved to block the only exit. What is the meaning of this intrusion? I am a respected clerk of this institution. This is an outrage, the university clerk, mastermind, said. An outrage, Mr. Croft, or a long overdue reckoning. You are a parasite, sir, who felt wronged by this institution and sought not to rise by merit, but to profit from its corruption, explained Sherlock Holmes. Lies, slander. You have no proof of any such thing, the university clerk, mastermind, said. Oh, I have a great deal of proof. You lack the skill for forgery yourself, but you had access to the records. You knew which students were desperate, and in young Radford you found your golden goose, a brilliant artist to exploit and control, replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's voice was as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. He then turned his piercing gaze upon the trembling proctor. And you, Dr. Hayes, you were the gatekeeper. Croft discovered some past indiscretion, did he not, and used it to ensure that your examinations were the very ones whose integrity could be most easily compromised. He blackmailed you into silence and complicity. It is true, all of it. I saw no way out, said Dr. Bartholomew Hayes. His confession was a low murmur of defeat. Croft's face, however, had turned a mottled purple with rage, his veneer of respectability stripped away entirely. This university owes me. For 20 years I have toiled in obscurity while lesser men were promoted over my head. I merely took what was my due, the university clerk, mastermind, replied. What you'll be taking, Mr. Croft, is a trip to the station. I am arresting you for conspiracy to commit fraud and for blackmail, said Constable Grimshaw. The constable stepped forward, his handcuffs producing a sharp, metallic click that seemed to seal the clerk's fate. As Croft was led away, still sputtering indignantly, Holmes turned his attention to the now weeping figure of Cecil Radford. He picked up one of the forged certificates from the floor, his expression a mixture of clinical interest and something akin to pity. The intricate scheme, born of resentment and desperation, had finally been brought into the light. A week after the affair had concluded, with the university's particular scandal contained, and its chief malefactors awaiting justice, we found ourselves once more within the familiar comfort of the Dilettante Detectives Club. A healthy fire crackled in the hearth, its cheerful snapping a stark contrast to the grim business we were there to dissect. The air, thick with the scent of old leather and Victor Trevor's pipe smoke, seemed to hum with quiet anticipation. Holmes stood before the fireplace, one elbow resting upon the mantelpiece. He held not a pipe, but a single sheet of the incriminating Italian paper, holding it up so the gaslight shone through it. The members, Trevor among them, leaned forward in their plush armchairs, their faces a study in rapt attention. The error in the initial police theory, and indeed in my own early thoughts, was to assume the motive was simple blackmail. It is a common enough vice, deduced Sherlock Holmes. But surely Dr. Hayes's predicament suggests it. A man of his standing, caught in such a web, answered Mr. Atherton. Mr. Atherton, a senior fellow with a perpetually skeptical air, peered over his spectacles. Holmes acknowledged the point, with a slight nod, before continuing. Indeed, but the scale was too grand for a single target. Why steal Mr. Abernathy's ledgers? Not for past debts. Those are mere leverage. No, the ledgers were stolen to build a map of future opportunities. They revealed not who was in debt, but who was likely to be, observed Sherlock Holmes. So this clerk was prospecting for clients, like some common tradesman peddling wares, responded Victor Trevor. Trevor's question was sharp, cutting to the heart of it. Holmes offered a thin smile of approval. Precisely, Trevor. Our mastermind, the overlooked university clerk, was a businessman of crime. He possessed the resentment and the ambition, Born from years of watching men, he deemed his inferiors advance past him. Yet he lacked the critical skill. He could not forge a single line. Sherlock Holmes noted. In Cecil Radford, he found his instrument. A brilliant student, a true artist with a pen, yet drowning in desperation. One provided the motive, the other the means, stated Sherlock Holmes. Holmes paused, his gaze distant, as if seeing the young forger's plight in the flickering firelight. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the logs. The clerk did not merely employ Radford. He preyed upon his weakness, exploiting his talent and his fear until the young man was utterly trapped. The stolen paper was not just a tool, it was a symbol, a blank slate upon which they wrote their corrupt enterprise. As I observed Holmes, I realized I was seeing beyond the cold, calculating facade he so often presented. Here stood a man who truly grasped the tragic dance of human frailty. This case, I understood, had been solved not merely through footprints or ciphers, but through a profound appreciation for the very chemistry of the soul. Later, as we walked across the university grounds, the bells of a nearby chapel chiming the late hour, I considered the change in his methods. The meticulous study of paper composition, the analysis of ink, the understanding of a forger's hand, these were new arrows in his quiver. It was a damnable business, Holmes, to see a mind like Radford's twisted to such a purpose. Dr. John Watson added. It was a lesson, Watson, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He stopped, his gaze sweeping over the ancient stone buildings, dark save for a few lit windows where students still labored over their books. His voice, when he spoke again, was low and reflective, carrying a profound gravity on the cool night air. A lesson that the most dangerous darkness is not found in the back alleys of Whitechapel, but in the quiet halls of ambition. It is a darkness that hides in plain sight, fueled by pride and despair, and it is a darkness we shall undoubtedly encounter again, explained Sherlock Holmes.